She wasn't a biker, nor was she part of the club. Yet when the blade came down, she stepped in front of it. That single moment changed everything, because hours later, 300 roaring Hells Angels would surround an entire hospital. The town was small enough that everyone knew when engines thundered down Main Street, yet big enough that not everyone dared to look up. That night, the neon sign of the rusted Anchor Bar buzzed and flickered, spilling pale light onto cracked pavement. Inside, the jukebox hummed a country song, half drowned by laughter, clinking bottles, and the scrape of boots across wooden floors. Anna Clark sat at the far end of the counter, nursing a cup of coffee she hadn't even sweetened. 32, worn thin from working 2 jobs, she wasn't here for fun. She was here to breathe, to be somewhere that felt alive after days that felt like survival. She never imagined that this night, this quiet sip of burnt coffee would place her in the line of a knife meant for someone else. The air changed when Marcus Iron Hand Varela walked in. 6'3", built like a man who had lived in iron and fire, with leather patched in Hells Angels insignia stretched across his back. 2 brothers followed behind him, their cuts faded but clear, full patch members, men who carried an aura of violence and loyalty that made others instinctively step aside. They weren't strangers here. The Anchor tolerated them because they paid, respected the bar's code, and never let outsiders disrespect the place. But people always stared, because Marcus wasn't just a biker, he was a captain. His name carried weight in towns that feared the echo of motorcycle engines after midnight. Anna noticed the silence ripple as Marcus approached the bar, but she didn't lower her gaze. She had seen his kind before, men hardened by roads, danger, and choices that carved them into stone. But tonight, his shoulders carried something heavier than leather. He ordered a whiskey neat, voice gravel low, and sat 2 stools down from her. Their eyes met for a brief second, hers tired but steady, his unreadable, yet edged with exhaustion. She didn't know it then, but that small flicker of eye contact would change everything about the night. Outside, the cold air carried whispers of something darker. A rival gang had slipped into town, men who hated Marcus for history written in blood and asphalt. One of them, lean with jittering hands, had been waiting in the shadows near the side alley, a knife glinting in his pocket, the kind you buy cheap but aim with intention. He had tracked Marcus for weeks, convinced that stabbing him in public would send a message no court or bullet ever could. His chance arrived when Marcus leaned across the counter to light a cigarette, his guard down for a rare moment. Anna saw the blur before anyone else did. The door slammed open, a figure lunged, and steel flashed under the buzzing neon. Marcus half-turned, but not fast enough. Instinct seized Anna. No thought, no plan. She moved before her mind caught up, body surging between the blade and the man it hunted. The knife sank into her shoulder, hot pain ripping through flesh as gasps filled the room. The attacker's eyes widened, shock overtaking rage as blood blossomed on Anna's shirt. For one heartbeat, the world froze. Marcus's glass shattered on the floor. His 2 brothers roared forward, slamming the assailant against the wall, fists and fury exploding. Chairs toppled, people screamed, but Anna barely heard any of it. She staggered, clutching her shoulder, breath shallow as warmth poured between her fingers. Marcus caught her before she hit the ground, his arms unexpectedly gentle for a man carved from violence. "Why the hell would you do that?" His voice shook, not with fear, but with disbelief. She blinked up at him, lips pale, whispering, "Because he was aiming at you. And there was a boy standing behind you too." Her eyes flickered toward a child cowering near a booth, frozen in terror. Marcus followed her gaze, realization dawning that she hadn't just stepped in for him. She'd shielded innocents caught in crossfire. Sirens wailed in the distance, neon mixing with red and blue lights as someone screamed for an ambulance. Marcus barked orders, his men pinning the would-be killer face first to the floor, boots grinding against wrists. But his focus never left Anna. Her skin turned clammy, her breaths shorter, yet her jaw clenched in stubborn defiance, as if pain would not have the last word. He pressed his hand against her wound, leather gloves soaking in blood. For a man who had survived street wars and ambushes, nothing unsettled him like the sight of a stranger bleeding for him. The paramedics arrived, voices clipped and urgent. They tried to push Marcus aside, but his glare alone froze them long enough for him to growl, "Keep her alive." They lifted Anna onto a stretcher, tubes and pressure pads clumsy against the slick of blood as the gurney wheeled toward the waiting ambulance. Marcus followed like a shadow, his Harley abandoned outside without a thought. He had seen death before, too much of it, but the idea that this woman might die because of him twisted something deep in his chest he didn't want to name. Engines rumbled as more bikers arrived, drawn by the scent of chaos and brotherhood. They circled the bar, their headlights cutting through the night as the ambulance doors slammed shut. Marcus climbed onto his bike, ignoring police shouting for him to stop, and roared after the flashing lights. Beside him, half a dozen brothers followed, a thunderous escort of steel and loyalty chasing the fragile beat of one woman's heart. Anna slipped into unconsciousness, unaware that the knife meant for a captain had lit a fuse that would soon bring 300 bikers to the doors of a hospital. The ambulance tore through the night, sirens slicing the silence, as if time itself could be rushed. Inside, Anna lay pale against white sheets, every bump in the road sending waves of fire through her body. Paramedics shouted numbers, their hands moving fast, but blood kept seeping between the pads. Her eyes fluttered, catching fragments of ceiling lights passing above her. Beside the stretcher, Marcus clung to the metal railing, his presence like a storm trying to fit inside a steel box. He wasn't supposed to be there. Paramedics had barked at him to get out, but he had growled back, and no one had dared push harder. His face, lined by years of command and roads survived, was locked on Anna, as if willpower alone could drag her through. "You hold on," he muttered, low enough that only she might hear. "You hold on, or 300 men won't let this town sleep." She wanted to answer, but the oxygen mask pressed tight against her lips left her only with shallow breaths and flickering eyes. Then the ambulance braked hard, doors flew open, and floodlights washed over them as they rolled her into the emergency bay. Hospital staff swarmed, barking instructions, shoving Marcus back. For the first time in years, he stepped without control. The gurney vanished through double doors, leaving him behind with nothing but blood drying on his gloves. In the waiting area, tension thickened fast. Nurses whispered, staring at his cut, the patch that carried both fear and reputation. One security guard reached for his radio, murmuring about calling for police backup. Marcus felt their eyes branding him, not as a man desperate for someone's life, but as a threat. He ignored them, pacing, fists clenching, mind replaying that moment. Anna stepping in front, steel plunging into her shoulder. No reason, no logic. She had no ties to him, no stake in his survival. Yet she had chosen pain when she could have chosen escape. Outside, engines rolled in, first half a dozen, then a dozen more. Chrome gleamed under sodium lamps, exhaust clouds rising like war drums. Word had spread with wildfire speed. Their captain had been targeted, and a woman now bled in his place. Brothers from nearby chapters poured into the lot, boots crunching gravel, leather vests carrying patches heavy with history. They didn't shout, didn't rage. They stood, a wall of silence around the hospital, engines idling low, making the ground tremble. Nurses glanced nervously at the windows, the sight of patch jackets multiplying by the minute, like a storm swelling on the horizon. Marcus stepped outside. One of his oldest lieutenants, Rocco, met him halfway, scarred face, hands tattooed with years of stories. Rocco asked the only question that mattered. "She alive?" "They've got her in surgery," Marcus said, voice hard. "She's bleeding bad." Rocco's jaw set. "Then this hospital belongs to her until she walks out." It wasn't a threat, it was a promise. Police cruisers arrived next, lights flashing, officers stepping out with hands near their holsters, but they didn't advance. They saw the line of bikers, 2 rows deep now, helmets off, eyes unblinking, every stance radiating a vow unspoken. It wasn't chaos. It was discipline, the kind built not by laws, but by loyalty. The officers muttered into radios, unsure whether to treat it as a protest or the prelude to war. Inside, Marcus pushed his way back to the desk. The attending nurse, hands trembling, said they needed blood. Rare type, supplies low. He rolled up his sleeve instantly, veins bulging from years of work and war. But when she saw the patch on his chest, hesitation clouded her face. "We can't just accept from anyone without verification," she stammered. "There are protocols." Marcus's voice dropped to a growl. "Protocols don't bleed. She's bleeding. Take it." Still, she hesitated, looking over her shoulder at an administrator now hovering, face pale, fear mixing with disdain. "We can't involve them," the man muttered. "It's liability." Marcus leaned in, eyes burning through him. "She took a knife meant for me. She didn't ask about liability. She didn't stop to check rules. She bled because she had more courage than half this town. If she dies because you want clean paperwork, this building will never be quiet again." The words hung heavy, not shouted, but edged with truth sharp enough to cut. For a moment, even the administrator faltered under that weight. Marcus stood like a storm tethered by thin rope, barely holding back fury, but beneath it was desperation, as raw as the blood still drying on his hands. He didn't care about politics or reputations. All he cared about was whether Anna Clark, the woman who had stepped between him and steel, would breathe another dawn. Outside, more engines arrived, swelling the crowd to nearly 100. Locals peeked from windows, murmuring in fear and awe. Whispers spread. The angels are here for her, not to burn, but to guard. The hospital became an island under siege, not by fire, but by loyalty louder than sirens. In the sterile hallways beyond the swinging doors, a team of surgeons bent over Anna, fighting to stitch closed a wound that had already carved open the fate of an entire brotherhood. The emergency doors slammed shut, locking Anna beyond the reach of anyone who cared about her. Inside the operating room, surgeons bent over her, voices clipped, gloves soaked as they worked to clamp an artery cut deep. Every second mattered, but outside those sterile walls, a very different battle was already building. Marcus stood in the waiting room, like a caged animal, jaw clenched, eyes fixed on the red light above the door that pulsed, "In surgery." A nurse approached timidly, clipboard in hand. "We'll update you when we can, sir." "Not soon enough," he muttered. His tone made her flinch back. He wasn't trying to scare her, but fear was the shadow he carried, stitched into every patch of leather on his back. Minutes dragged into hours. The fluorescent lights buzzed overhead, their cold glow mocking the heat boiling in Marcus's chest. Every time the door cracked open and a nurse hurried through, his hopes jerked, only to be dashed by their silence. Meanwhile, the waiting area filled with more uniforms. Not bikers this time, but police, standing stiff along the walls, hands resting near weapons. They weren't here to comfort anyone. They were here because 100 Hell's Angels outside had made this hospital the most volatile square of real estate in the county. An administrator finally stepped forward, his tie too tight, his glasses fogged with nerves. "Mr. Varela," he said, voice carefully measured, "we need to speak about the situation outside." Marcus's eyes cut to him. "The situation is in that room. She's on the table, fighting for her life. Everything else comes second." The man cleared his throat, looking past Marcus toward the doors where murmurs of engines still seeped in like thunder. "Your associates are intimidating staff. Patients are frightened. This is a hospital, not—" "Not what?" Marcus snapped. "Not a battlefield? Because it is one. You think your halls are clean, safe, untouched. But right now, she's bleeding out because one of your towns let a rival slip a blade in, and she's here in your hands. Don't lecture me about fear. We live in it. We ride through it. She bled in it." The administrator faltered, but before he could speak again, 2 security guards stepped closer, their posture screaming. They'd been told to push Marcus out. One even reached toward his shoulder. He didn't flinch. His voice dropped instead, low enough to crack bone. "Touch me, and 300 men outside will hear about it before you take your next breath." Silence followed, thick as smoke. The guards froze, glancing to the administrator, who suddenly found courage leaking from him like air from a punctured tire. We simply need order," he stammered. "You want order?" Marcus leaned closer, eyes like steel under pressure. "Order is simple. Keep her alive. That's the only order that matters." Meanwhile, Anna drifted somewhere between darkness and light. Her world was flashes of cold instruments, a surgeon's calm voice calling for suction, a machine beeping faster than her own heartbeat. She couldn't speak, couldn't move. But somewhere in the fog, she remembered the moment. The blade aimed at Marcus, the little boy standing in its path. Instinct had shoved her forward, not courage, not reason, just a split-second choice that now pinned her to a table under glaring lights. Back in the waiting area, Marcus was intercepted by Rocco again, the older biker's face grim. Chapters are still rolling in. Parking lots full, streets backed 2 blocks. Locals are panicking. Media's here too. Marcus exhaled hard through his nose. He knew what the headlines would look like. Hell's Angels besiege hospital. He also knew the truth. Not one of his men had raised a fist since the ambulance doors closed. They weren't here to riot. They were here because the woman inside wasn't just Anna Clark anymore. She was the shield that had saved their captain, and in their world, that meant she had become blood. Police commanders argued with administrators in hushed tones at the far corner. Words like crowd control, riot gear, and National Guard floating through the air. Marcus caught every one of them, his fists curling. None of them cared about her. To them, she was collateral in a standoff. To him, she was the center of it. Finally, the door swung open. A surgeon stepped out, mask still tugged under his chin. "She's stable for now," he said. Relief surged, but the next words cut it down. "She needs a transfusion, a rare blood type. Supplies are limited." Marcus was already rolling up his sleeve again. "Take it from me." The surgeon hesitated, eyeing the tattoos, the patches, the reputation that walked before Marcus. "We have regulations." Marcus's laugh was bitter, empty of humor. "Your regulations will write her death certificate. Test me. Take the blood. Do whatever paperwork you need. But you're not turning me down while she's lying in there." For a long moment, the surgeon met his eyes, weighing risk against desperation. Then, with a curt nod, he motioned to the nurse, "Draw him." As the needle slid into his arm, Marcus stared at the red line filling the bag. For once, the blood wasn't shed in alleys or highways. It was given willingly to pay back a debt words could never cover. Outside, engines continued to rumble, a chorus of loyalty echoing against hospital walls. And above them all, the red light over the operating room still burned, each flicker daring to decide if sacrifice had been enough. Rumors travel faster than sirens. By the time Marcus's blood was being drawn into plastic bags, the story had already leapt across county lines. Phones buzzed in dark kitchens, at gas stations off the interstate, inside clubhouses where the smell of grease and whiskey never really left. The message was simple but electric. A woman stepped in front of a blade for Iron Hand. She's fighting for her life. The hospital's swarming with cops. Marcus is inside. That was all it took. Engines roared to life across 3 states. Men who hadn't ridden in weeks strapped on helmets and pulled jackets tight, patches catching the glow of midnight. Highway patrol radios lit up with reports of convoys streaking down empty roads, red taillights stretching like ribbons across the asphalt. It wasn't rage that fueled them. It was a code, ancient in its own way. Someone had bled for one of theirs. That meant she was now one of theirs, whether she knew it or not. Back at the hospital, the parking lot swelled like a tide no one could stop. First 100 bikes, then 200. By dawn, nearly 300 Harleys, choppers, and cruisers crowded every inch of pavement, engines idling low and steady, the ground vibrating like a heartbeat that belonged to something larger than men. Locals peered from windows, frightened and fascinated. Reporters shoved microphones toward the police barricades, cameras catching the sight of patch after patch. Hells Angels, California, Nevada, Arizona, Colorado. The air smelled of exhaust, leather, and unspoken promise. Police commanders braced for violence. To them, it looked like a siege. But no windows broke, no fists flew. Instead, the bikers stood in silence, arms crossed, eyes fixed on the building, as if their presence alone could shield the woman lying inside. That silence unnerved officials more than shouting ever could. It wasn't the chaos of a mob. It was the discipline of men who knew exactly what they were willing to do if pushed. Inside the ICU, Anna drifted between nightmares and half-waking flashes. Machines beeped steady rhythms. Tubes tugged at her skin. Every so often, she opened her eyes, but the world blurred into white coats and shadows she couldn't place. Somewhere in the haze, she remembered why she was here. The knife, the man lunging, Marcus's broad back turned, but most of all, the boy, a child no older than 10, frozen near a booth when the attack erupted. If she hadn't moved, the blade would have sliced through him after Marcus. That image burned even through the morphine fog. Wide eyes, terror, innocence that had no place in a war of men. She whispered something once, words barely audible behind the oxygen mask. A nurse leaned close, straining to hear. The boy was safe. Anna's eyes fluttered shut again before the answer came. Marcus heard about it later from the nurse. It struck him deeper than any blade ever had. She hadn't been thinking about him at all. She had thrown herself forward because of a child who would never even know her name. That kind of instinct, the raw refusal to let innocence bleed, was something he thought the world had forgotten. By mid-morning, Rival gangs caught wind of the gathering. In dimly lit basements, men muttered about opportunity. 300 angels at one hospital, sitting ducks. Weapons were checked, maps unfolded, but fear lingered in their eyes. Even their hatred balked at the idea of charging against that many engines lined up shoulder to shoulder. Whispers grew instead. Maybe wait. Maybe let the cops do the job. Journalists spun their own stories. Headlines drafted on laptops read, "Biker Army Surrounds Hospital. Town Under Siege by Hell's Angels." None of them captured the truth, that the men outside weren't holding the hospital hostage, but guarding it. That the roar waiting in silence wasn't for destruction, but for one woman's chance at life. From the second-floor window, Marcus finally allowed himself to look. 300 men below, still as statues, waiting for his word. He had led them into fights, into territory disputes, into chaos that painted roads red. But this was different. This wasn't about power or revenge. It was about a stranger named Anna Clark, who had shown them all something they'd nearly forgotten. That sacrifice doesn't always wear leather, and loyalty can be born in a single heartbeat of courage. By the time the sun cleared the rooftops, the hospital no longer looked like a hospital. It looked like a fortress under guard, ringed by 300 motorcycles that lined every curb, their chrome gleaming in the early light. Engines rumbled in rhythm, never quite shutting off, as if the machines themselves refused to let silence fall. Police lights strobed red and blue at the barricades, their hum competing with the low thunder of exhaust pipes. Inside, administrators wrung their hands, pacing offices that suddenly felt too small. Doctors muttered about being trapped between medical duty and political fear. Patients peered nervously through blinds, expecting violence to erupt at any moment. But outside, the scene held steady. Not with the chaos of a riot, but with the eerie discipline of men who understood loyalty better than law. Marcus stood at the main entrance, arms folded, leather cut draped heavy over his shoulders. He had been awake all night, blood still drying on his gloves, his eyes locked on the doors that hid Anna's fight for survival. Rocco leaned close, his voice low. "Cops are itching. One wrong move, they'll storm us." Marcus shook his head. "Then we don't give them that move. Not today." He stepped forward, his boots striking pavement loud enough to silence a few murmurs in the crowd. Cameras clicked. Reporters shoved mics forward, their questions firing like bullets. "Is this a takeover? What are your demands? Why surround a hospital?" Marcus let them all hang unanswered until the crowd grew restless. Then his voice cut through the morning air, steady, sharp, amplified not by a microphone, but by the weight of conviction. "We're not here to fight. We're here for her." The words landed like a stone in still water, rippling across hundreds of men who straightened their backs. For once, the world outside their brotherhood heard them speak, not in threats, but in vow. "She stepped into a blade meant for me," Marcus continued, his gaze sweeping across the flashing cameras. "She didn't ask who I was. She didn't care about patches, about history, about names. She just bled. And until she walks out alive, this hospital will know she's not alone." The crowd of bikers answered, not with cheers, but with silence, their engines cutting off one by one until only the heartbeat of the moment remained. To outsiders, it was terrifying. To those who knew the code, it was reverence. Inside, administrators scrambled harder. "He's making it a spectacle," one board member hissed. "If this goes viral, we'll look like we lost control." Another countered, "If she dies and 300 bikers are outside, we'll lose more than control." Meanwhile, patients in the waiting area whispered. An old woman clutched her rosary tighter, whispering prayers, Not just for the girl in surgery, but for peace to hold in the streets. A young man recorded footage on his phone, muttering, "They're here for her, not to burn the place down." The narrative was shifting, piece by piece, as witnesses realized the so-called siege wasn't about destruction. It was about guardianship. Marcus paced the entrance, his mind never far from the red light above the operating room. Each hour stretched longer than the last. At times, he closed his eyes, replaying the image of Anna staggering, with blood soaking her shirt. He couldn't explain why it mattered so deeply, but it did. She hadn't just saved him. She had reminded him of something the road often beat out of men, that lives outside the Brotherhood could still be worth defending. By noon, the press had painted every possible picture. One network claimed the Angels were preparing to riot. Another showed footage of them silently standing in formation, captioned, "Guardians or Threats." Social media feeds lit up with divided voices. Some condemned them as outlaws flexing muscle. Others marveled at a loyalty so fierce that 300 men would stand down the law for a stranger. Police commanders conferred nervously by their cruisers. "If they stay quiet, we can't escalate," one admitted. "But if she doesn't make it, God help us all." Marcus heard that and let the words burn in his chest. He turned back to his men. "Hold steady," he ordered. "No fists, no fights, engines only. Our silence will scream louder than any riot." And it did. By afternoon, the streets around the hospital were lined with men sitting cross-legged on asphalt, helmets at their sides, arms folded. Rows of motorcycles gleamed like steel statues, their shadows long in the fading sun. The town was frozen, waiting, not in terror of attack, but in awe of the kind of loyalty that made outlaws into guardians and a wounded woman into a symbol. Inside the hospital, the tension was coiled so tightly it felt like the walls themselves might snap. Administrators huddled in glass offices with blinds drawn, their voices rising, snapping at one another about liability, politics, and optics. Police commanders stood stiff in corners, radios buzzing with updates about the swelling crowd outside. The word siege rolled off their tongues with dread, but the truth was messier than that. The bikers hadn't thrown a punch. They hadn't shattered a single window. They simply stood, a wall of leather and steel around the hospital, and that unnerved officials more than violence ever could. Marcus sat rigid in a plastic chair near the ICU, every nerve in his body burning with waiting. The faint beep of monitors down the hall felt like a taunt. He had given blood hours ago, but Anna still wasn't through the worst. A nurse passed, eyes flicking nervously to his cut, as if his presence itself could infect the sterile hallways. He caught her glance and didn't flinch. He'd been treated as the enemy all his life. This was nothing new. The hospital director finally stepped forward, flanked by two administrators in suits and a security guard whose chest puffed with borrowed authority. His voice tried for calm, but the tremor betrayed him. "Mr. Varela, we need to discuss your associates outside. Their presence is preventing patients from entering. This cannot continue." Marcus stood, his height eclipsing the man, his voice steady, low, but it carried like the growl of an engine before ignition. "They're not preventing anything. They're guarding. The woman who saved me is in your hands, and until she breathes on her own, no one's leaving. Not me, not them." The director adjusted his glasses nervously. "You're turning this into a standoff. If the media portrays this as—" Marcus cut him off, stepping close enough that the man's tie trembled against his chest. "The media's already out there. You're worried about cameras. I'm worried about her heartbeat. You get her what she needs, or you'll learn real quick what 300 men look like when they stop being quiet." That landed like a hammer. The guard shifted uneasily. The administrators muttered, one saying, "We can't prioritize someone just because—" But Marcus snapped his head toward him. "She bled for me. She didn't ask who I was, didn't care about patches. She stepped in front of a blade without hesitation. If she doesn't deserve priority, then what the hell does?" Back outside, the press swarmed the barricades, lenses aimed at the sea of bikers who hadn't moved for hours. Reporters whispered that it looked less like a gang gathering and more like a military formation. Rows of men, silent, hands crossed, engines cold but ready. The police had expected chaos. Instead, they got something stranger. Stillness, patience, loyalty carved into posture. The contrast made for irresistible footage. Inside, another nurse rushed up to the director. "She's losing blood again. We need more donors. Her type is rare." Marcus stepped forward instantly. "Test every man out there. You'll find what you need." The director recoiled. "We can't possibly bring those men into our facility. The liability, the contamination." Marcus's patience snapped, his voice thundering through the hall, shaking every person within earshot. "Liability? You want liability? You'll have 100 cameras filming when this hospital lets a woman die because it didn't like the patches on the backs of men who lined up to save her." Reporters heard the echo, microphones catching every word through the cracked doors. Within minutes, the story flipped. Headlines scrolled across screens. "Hospital rejects biker blood as woman fights for life." Comment sections flooded with outrage. Public opinion tilted fast, sympathy sliding toward the men outside whose silence had turned into visible sacrifice. Administrators scrambled, whispering frantic arguments, but the pressure was mounting from all sides. Police fearing unrest, media fueling fire, and Marcus, standing unmovable in the center. He jabbed a finger toward the ICU. "You've got 300 donors outside, men ready to roll up their sleeves. Every second you waste is another beat of her heart you're gambling with. You want peace? Then take the damn blood." Finally, the surgeon who had worked on Anna stepped into the fray, his mask dangling around his neck, his voice tired but sharp. "He's right. We don't have time for politics. Either we bring them in for screening, or we lose her." The director sagged, defeated by the weight of reality. "Fine," he muttered. "Start with a handful." Marcus leaned closer, eyes hard. "Start with all of them. She's not dying because of your fear." Within the hour, rows of bikers filed into the auxiliary wing, sleeves rolled up, veins tapped, needles slid in, bags filled with blood from men who had spilled it on highways and in alleys, but now offered it freely under sterile lights. Reporters filmed the sight of patched jackets lined along hospital corridors, their faces grim but steady. One of them muttered, "Never thought we'd bleed for something this clean." Outside, the engines remained quiet, but the story was roaring louder than ever. A brotherhood once branded as outlaws had become a shield, forcing a system to confront its own prejudice. And at the center of it all lay Anna Clark, her life hanging by a thread stitched from courage, loyalty, and the stubborn refusal of 300 men to let her fade into silence. The red light above the ICU door flickered like a warning beacon. Hours had passed since Anna was wheeled in, but Marcus hadn't moved far from that spot. He leaned against the wall, arms crossed, but his stillness was deceptive. Inside, he was a storm. Nurses slipped in and out, their faces pale, their silence heavy. Each time he asked, they only muttered, "She's holding on for now." It wasn't enough. Finally, the surgeon burst through the doors, his gown splattered, mask tugged low. "She's crashing," he snapped at the staff. "We need more blood now." Marcus pushed forward instantly. Then take it from me again. Take it from anyone out there. We've got hundreds waiting. The surgeon's eyes darted toward the administrators clustered nearby. Their hesitation was obvious, their fear of optics outweighing their fear of death. We can't just... One began, but Marcus cut him off with a roar that filled the hallway. She's dying while you argue about paperwork. His voice cracked like a whip, and the bikers lined along the corridor surged to their feet, boots thundering against tile, leather creaking. Suddenly, the sterile hospital felt like the floor of a courthouse about to be overrun. Security rushed in, hands on radios, but Marcus shoved past them. He slammed his palms on the counter, leaning across the administrators. Listen to me, he growled, every syllable a nail hammered into steel. If she flatlines because you're afraid of the men outside, this hospital won't just answer to me. It'll answer to every engine shaking this town right now. A nurse shouted from inside the ICU. We're losing her! The hallway froze, alarms wailing faintly through the closed doors. Marcus spun to face his men, his voice hoarse but commanding. Line up. Every man with blood left in his veins. Line up and don't stop until she breathes. The response was instant. Boots pounded the floor as dozens of bikers stepped forward, rolling up sleeves, tattoos stark against pale skin. Nurses scrambled, wheeling carts of equipment, vials rattling as they prepared to screen blood as fast as hands could move. Bags filled, one after another. Red Rivers offered without question. For once, the angels bled, not in violence, but in service. The media outside caught it all. Cameras flashed as bikers walked into the hospital in lines, their leather patch jackets a shocking contrast to sterile corridors. Anchors whispered into microphones. The angels are donating. They're saving her. The narrative flipped in real time, the siege turning into a rescue. Inside, the first compatible match was rushed into the ICU. Nurses hooked up the line, crimson flowing into Anna's fragile veins. The surgeon barked for suction, for pressure, for steady hands. Minutes stretched into eternities. Marcus stood at the glass, watching through a blur of reflections, fists clenched so tight, his knuckles whitened under tattoos. Then, beep, stronger this time. The flat rhythm that had terrified every ear in the room found its beat again. The surgeon exhaled sharply, relief spilling across his face. She's stabilizing, he muttered. Marcus sagged against the wall, sweat sliding down his temple. For the first time since the knife flashed, he allowed himself to breathe. Behind him, bikers waited, arms bandaged, faces grim but proud. They didn't cheer. They didn't need to. Their silence was heavier than any victory cry. The administrators tried to save face, stammering about exceptional circumstances and temporary permissions. But no one was listening. Not the nurses, not the police, not the bikers who had just filled half the hospital's blood banks with their veins. The truth had already taken hold, carried by cameras and whispers alike. A woman who wasn't one of them had thrown herself into the fire, and in return, the angels had bled until she was pulled back from the edge. As the alarms inside faded, Marcus pressed his palm flat against the glass, his voice low, almost reverent. You don't even know it, Anna, but you just reminded the world who we are. The first thing Anna heard when she surfaced from the fog was the steady beep of a machine. It was faint, almost like a metronome in the distance, but it tethered her back to the world. Her eyelids felt heavy, her throat raw, but she forced them open. Sterile white light stung her eyes. For a moment, she didn't know where she was, or even who she was. Then the pain in her shoulder flared, sharp and hot, and memory crashed back. The knife, the bar, Marcus, and that boy in the corner who would have taken the blade if she hadn't moved. She tried to speak, but her lips cracked, voice only a rasp. A nurse leaned over quickly, placing a hand on her arm. "Easy. You're safe. You made it." Safe. The word almost felt unreal. She blinked, the fog clearing bit by bit until she saw the figure standing at the corner of the room. Marcus, arms folded, back against the wall, watching her like a sentry who hadn't moved in days. His leather vest was still stained with her blood, his face carved with sleepless hours. When their eyes met, his stony expression softened just enough to reveal the storm beneath. "You woke up," he said, voice low and gravelly. Anna swallowed, her throat burning. "The boy?" Marcus pushed off the wall, stepping closer. He crouched by her bed, eyes steady on hers. "He's fine. Not a scratch." Relief washed through her, heavier than any drug in her veins. She closed her eyes, exhaling. "Good. That's all that matters." Marcus shook his head. "No. What matters is you. You shouldn't have done it." Her lips curved into the faintest, exhausted smile. "Someone had to." He sat there for a long moment, as if weighing words he wasn't used to saying. Finally, his voice broke, quieter than she'd ever expect from a man like him. "You didn't owe me a damn thing, but now 300 men outside owe you everything." She blinked at him, not sure she heard right. 300? Bikers from 6 states. Hospital's been surrounded since the minute you were brought in. They gave blood, sat in silence, stood down the cops. All for you. Tears pricked her eyes, though she didn't understand why. She wasn't one of them. She didn't wear a patch, didn't live their roads. She was just a woman who had moved without thinking. "Why?" she whispered. Marcus leaned back, his gaze unflinching. "Because you reminded us. Reminded me. That loyalty ain't a word you print on leather. It's what you do when it costs the most. You didn't ask who I was. You didn't care. You just stepped in. That's what family is. And now you're ours, whether you wanted it or not." Outside her window, the murmur of engines rolled like thunder trapped in the streets. She turned her head weakly, catching the sight of rows of men through the glass, standing silent guard. No fists raised, no chaos, just presence, just loyalty. News cameras swarmed the sidewalks, reporters speaking in hushed awe, their narratives shifting from fear to astonishment. In a stunning turn, one anchor said live, "The Hells Angels have transformed what began as a tense standoff into an unprecedented show of solidarity. 300 bikers have donated blood and stood in silent vigil for a woman who shielded their captain from an attack. They call her family now." The footage spread faster than wildfire. Images of patched men rolling up sleeves, of Marcus walking hospital halls like a commander in unfamiliar territory, of Anna's face, pale but alive under the glare of ICU lights. Public opinion tilted overnight. Some still muttered outlaw. Others, for the first time, whispered the word honor. Back inside, Anna's voice cracked as she whispered, "I didn't do it for you." Marcus tilted his head, one eyebrow raised, but not offended. "No? I saw the boy behind you. He would have—" Her breath hitched, but she forced the words. "I couldn't let him take it." For a heartbeat, Marcus just stared. Then, slowly, he exhaled, a strange mix of disbelief and respect in his eyes. "So you didn't just save me. You saved him, a kid who never would have walked out of that bar. She nodded weakly. That's why I moved. Marcus sat back, running a hand over his beard, his eyes distant. Finally, he looked at her again, voice steady but reverent. That's even more than I thought. You bled for 2 lives that weren't yours, and that's why 300 men are standing outside right now, making sure you get to keep yours. Anna's eyes closed again, exhausted, but a single tear slid down her cheek. She hadn't thought herself brave, only desperate in a split second. But now the weight of what it had set in motion pressed down on her chest, heavier than the pain in her shoulder. She didn't just save a boy or a captain. She had awakened something bigger than herself, something roaring and silent at the same time, echoing in every idle engine outside. Dawn crept across the horizon, spilling gold over chrome and leather. The hospital, which had looked like a fortress through the night, softened in the light. 300 bikes gleamed in rows, dew catching on polished steel, engines silent now, but ready, always ready. Inside, Anna sat propped up in bed, shoulder-bound in thick dressings, face pale but alive. Every beep of the monitor behind her felt steadier, more confident. She had survived against every odd stacked against her. She was still here. Marcus entered the room without ceremony, as if doors had no authority over him. He carried a paper cup of bitter coffee, but placed it down untouched, his eyes staying on her. For once, there was something close to relief in them, though it wore itself like an ill-fitting jacket. You made it through the night, he said. Anna gave him a faint smile. So did you. He huffed, something almost like a laugh. Barely. Haven't closed my eyes once, but I wasn't about to until I knew you'd keep breathing. Silence settled, heavy but not uncomfortable. Outside, the low murmur of voices drifted up. Bikers gathered, waiting for word, waiting for her. She shifted slightly, wincing at the pain, then asked, "They're still out there?" Marcus nodded. Every last one. Haven't moved, haven't broken, just waiting for you. Her brow furrowed. Why? I'm not one of you. He leaned closer, his tone grave, absolute. You are now. You don't get a choice. When you stepped into that knife, you stitched yourself into us. We bleed for our own, and you bled first. Anna shook her head softly, overwhelmed by the weight of it. But she saw the truth in his eyes. These weren't men who spoke about loyalty. They lived it, raw and unforgiving. By mid-morning, the doctors declared she was stable enough to be moved to a recovery ward. Nurses wheeled her bed toward the entrance, sunlight spilling brighter through wide glass doors. The plan was simple. Transfer her quietly, avoid attention. But nothing about this moment would ever be quiet. The doors opened, and there they were. Rows upon rows of bikers standing shoulder to shoulder, their leather vests patched and worn, helmets tucked under arms. Engines lined both sides of the drive, forming a corridor of chrome and steel. As her bed rolled forward, the silence broke, not with chaos, but with the steady thunder of engines roaring to life, one by one, each note rising like a hymn. People watching from the sidewalks gasped. Reporters lifted cameras, capturing every second. 300 bikers stood in formation, a living wall, heads bowed as she was wheeled through. Not one jeer, not one outburst, just honor, loud in its silence, deafening in its discipline. Anna's eyes widened, tears blurring her vision. She had never seen anything like it. Not soldiers, not parades. This was different. This was outlaws turning reverence into a shield for one woman who hadn't even known their names. Marcus walked beside her bed, hand resting lightly on the rail. When they reached the end of the corridor, he raised his hand, and the engines fell silent, all at once, leaving only the pounding echo in the chest of every witness. He turned to face his men, his voice booming across the lot. She took a knife meant for me. She didn't wear our patch, didn't ride our roads, but she bled for us anyway. That makes her family. From this day forward, she carries our protection. No one touches her. No one forgets her. A murmur of approval swept the crowd, rough voices rumbling like distant thunder. Some men lifted fists, others simply nodded, but all of them stood straighter, as if claiming her with their silence. Anna's throat tightened. She tried to speak, but emotion caught her words. Instead, she whispered to Marcus, low enough only he could hear, "I didn't think anyone would remember me." He shook his head, leaning closer. "You'll be remembered every time an engine starts, every time a road is ridden. You gave us back something the world thought we lost." She looked out at the sea of men, their faces hard, but their eyes softened by respect. And for the first time since that blade tore into her, she let herself cry. Not from pain, but from the unbearable weight of being seen. As the nurses wheeled her into the waiting ambulance for transfer, the bikers mounted their bikes, one by one. Engines ignited, not in chaos, but in chorus, forming a convoy behind her. Chrome and leather glinted like armor in the rising sun. The hospital, once a cage of fear, now stood behind them as they rode forward, not away from her, but with her. For the townsfolk, it was a story they would tell for years. For the media, it was a headline no one could have scripted. But for Marcus and the men who followed him, it was simpler. One woman's split-second choice had redrawn the lines of brotherhood. She wasn't just the girl who took a knife. She was the heartbeat of 300 engines, the silent vow that loyalty could still roar louder than fear. And as the convoy thundered down the street, every head turned, every camera rolled. But Anna closed her eyes, letting the sound wash over her. For the first time since that night in the bar, she felt safe, not because she was alone, but because she never would be again. And that's how one woman's instinct changed everything. What started as a single knife in a dim bar ended with 300 engines roaring to shield her life. It wasn't about patches or reputations or headlines. It was about sacrifice and how loyalty can be born in the unlikeliest of moments. In the quiet hum of a small-town bar, Anna Clark's split-second decision to step in front of a knife not only saved a stranger and an innocent child, but ignited a firestorm of loyalty that reshaped lives forever. This tale teaches us a profound life lesson. True courage isn't born from grand plans or heroic titles. It's forged in the raw, unfiltered moments when we choose to protect others without a second thought. Anna, an ordinary woman worn by the grind of daily survival, didn't wear leather patches or ride thunderous roads. She simply acted on instinct, shielding Marcus, Iron Hand Varela, and a terrified boy from harm. In return, the Hells Angels, often painted as outlaws, revealed the depth of brotherhood, surrounding the hospital with 300 roaring engines, donating blood, and standing as silent guardians against fear and prejudice. Their unwavering presence reminds us that loyalty transcends labels. It's a debt paid in blood, silence, and unyielding support. In a world quick to judge and divide, this story stirs the soul, showing how one act of selfless bravery can bridge divides, awaken forgotten honor, and turn strangers into family. It urges us to reflect. When was the last time we stepped up for someone, not for glory, but because it was right? Anna's sacrifice echoes that even in chaos, humanity's light shines brightest through quiet heroism, inspiring us to live with open hearts and fierce compassion. What about you? How has a moment of unexpected kindness changed your life? Share your thoughts in the comments below. We'd love to hear your stories and build this community together. And if tales like this move you, hit that subscribe button today, so you never miss the narratives that prove courage and connection still roar in our modern world. Let's keep the conversation going. Your voice matters here.